Okay, members, let's go on to file item number 8. Mr. Grindstaff, you're going to kick this off, I believe.
I'll kick it off, but I'm going to ask Cindy Messer and Carl Leszewski to come up as the staff members responsible for the item. As you know, we hope on the home stretch for the Delta plan, but we will be making decisions in the near term about funding for the next fiscal year, and we thought it was appropriate that we start talking about what we should do in the near term, even before the Delta plan is adopted, and so we wanted to talk about that process. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Cindy and then go from there. And Jonas Minton's here today, and so I'm sure we're going to ask Jonas to come up and talk some about the process that he and Jason are running to look at near-term actions also.
Okay. Ms. Messer, you want to start this?
Sure, I will start this. And yes, I think what we'll do is I'll work halfway through the staff report, and just so folks can follow along with us, we are going to go in order of the staff report that you have in your meeting materials that's available on the back table for members of the audience. And then about halfway through, Carl's going to go ahead and take over and walk us through the categories, some of the financial information, and the attachments. And then after that, I think we will invite Mr. Minton up to give a brief overview and an update of the process that he has been coordinating and leading with Mr. Peltier, the Coalition to Support Delta Projects. So what I'm going to start off by doing is just setting the stage for today's discussion. And the way staff envisions this rolling out is that this is the first in a series of staff reports, presentations, discussion with the council members, discussion with other agencies and stakeholders that starts now and goes through the fall, most likely through the November council meeting, if not later. The objectives that staff have for today's discussion and presentation is to lay out a proposed framework for evaluating, prioritizing, coordinating, and funding near-term actions that the council and its staff will either undertake directly or will coordinate and work closely with other agencies and stakeholders to accomplish. This framework that, in the way we've laid it out in the staff report, is made up of several items, including objectives for the near-term actions, guiding principles by which we will select near-term actions as we develop our list moving down the road. It also includes categories that the near-term actions will fall under and some funding information by which we will implement these actions. One of the things I do want to mention today is the way staff envisions this package, and especially the first attachment, the Excel spreadsheet that's in there. These are straw man proposals. Staff has looked at a variety of sources, the statute, the draft Delta plan, the biological opinion requirements, other ongoing processes to get ideas, to get examples of near-term actions that we've included in our attachment 1. But this really is a kicking off point that launches a discussion with stakeholders, with other agencies, and it's a place for us to build upon as we move towards a finalized list of near-term actions. So I'm going to switch to a little bit about background. What brought us to the point today to make the decision to start this process, given that the Delta plan is not quite finalized yet. But the way we see it, there are some external and internal factors that have led us to this point, starting with sort of the external big picture factors. Obviously, as we know, the legislature has declared that there is a crisis in the state, in the Delta watershed, and with California's water infrastructure. And in response to that declaration, among other things, it created the Delta Stewardship Council and tasked us with addressing these crises through various actions, including achievement of the co-equal goals. So that is obviously a big driving factor in looking at near-term actions that should take place. We know, we've discussed the fact that actions need to take place in the near term as we wait for some of the longer, bigger processes to be finalized, such as the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and implemented. This is a ways down the road. There are things we can and should be doing now. From a more internal perspective, at least for staff, we are approaching the point, as Mr. Grindstaff mentioned, where The content of the draft Delta plan is stabilizing. We're moving towards commencing the recirculation process, the rulemaking process. We're getting to the pens down point with the draft Delta plan. So for staff, what that's allowed us to do is start to give some serious thought to this next critical phase in the council's history, which is implementing the Delta plan. And so the product of that thinking and discussion is the materials you see today before you in terms of our proposed framework for near-term actions. And we also have been keeping tabs and involved with and coordinating with other activities such as the Coalition to Support Delta Projects. Carl has been attending the meetings. I know Joe has also attended the meetings. And there seems to be a movement that is being launched and going forward that makes it feel like the right time for us to start our process to jump in and to stay coordinated with the variety of efforts that are taking place out there right now. So in terms of, I'm going to skip to the actual proposed framework for evaluating near-term actions. In terms of the objectives, that as we see them, as staff are proposing them today for the near-term actions, we see that the objectives in these initiatives should address statewide interests through achieving the co-equal goals. They should address critical needs for the state, including water supply reliability, ecosystem restoration, protecting the Delta's place, protecting water quality, and reducing risks associated with floods and other natural disasters. We also see that the near-term actions that we evaluate should serve to test a new governance approach as we've proposed it in the draft Delta plan, and they should demonstrate how science can be used to guide water resource management and ecosystem restoration efforts. We've also included guiding principles, some draft principles for selection of near-term actions, and these include pursuing initiatives that address the co-equal goals in a concurrent, comparable, and coordinated manner, that we prioritize these near-term actions that are to be implemented using existing funding resources, and that they demonstrate, again, the new governance strategies, they utilize best available science, they have adaptive management strategies, and they address costs that should or need to be paid by beneficiaries or stressors. We also have included in our guiding principles for selecting near-term actions a no-regrets type policy. And really what that means for us is that not only do these near-term actions address the co-equal goals, but they're also compatible with these longer-term efforts such as the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and ultimately the BDCP, the preferred alternative of the BDCP. So looking at what we can do now and looking ahead for value added. So with that, unless there's any questions, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Carl to kind of walk us through. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, one question, Cindy.
Sure.
Basically, it appears as though we are going to proceed as though the Delta plan were already submitted and approved. Can we do that legally?
I'm going to turn to Chris.
I'm going to answer. The law actually calls for us to have an interim plan. And we did that last year. We had a committee, and then the council adopted the interim plan. It's been some time ago. And I guess it's our recommendation that we view this really as an addition to the interim plan until we actually have adopted the Delta plan, but that we use the things that the council has agreed on, the policies and principles and actions that we've agreed on as we're developing the Delta plan to inform us as we do that. So I think legally we can.
Well, clarify the enforceability or not of the interim plan we adopted in 2000.
This is not enforceable.
So this is moral suasion as opposed to something with teeth in it?
Yes.
Is it going to be frustrating? Do you think we can do
Mr.
some of this
Stevens
stuff?
is nodding yes. Mr. Stevens.
That's right. I was nodding yes.
Nodding yes is better than nodding off.
That's right. And it is a bit warm in here, though, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe if they can turn on the air conditioning, that would help. I think the answer in general is no, they're not enforceable. And as Joe said, we've been tasked in the past with putting together an interim plan. The Delta plan obviously is going to have policies that are enforceable. It's not adopted yet. Your question is timely and on point. But I think what we're trying to do here is pull from the Delta Plan some of the guiding principles that are in the various chapters and use those as the lens through which we would make recommendations, funding recommendations to the governor, the legislature, other agencies with regard to proposed near-term actions. I think Cindy was right. This is just a list at this point, a straw man list, and so we're not there yet. But we're bringing up the subject now because it's important that we come up with those guiding principles, because it's really a new paradigm now with the co-equal goals, with the Delta Plan, and that should be the lens through which we look at all Delta-related actions.
I think it's a great idea. I usually look at the potential downside consequences. Is there anything that we would be doing that it could imperil the adoption of the plan that we've submitted?
Well, to answer in the abstract, there's always something that we could do that would imperil the adoption of the plan. I don't think it's this, though. I think this,
using reasonable probabilities.
I think not, because I think what we're trying to do here, first and foremost, and I know the chair and co-chair have been driving forces in this effort, is to really look at what we've developed through the Delta Plan and derive those principles and then put together something that's understandable that can really, again, be the lens through which we look at all near-term actions. So, yes, it should be consistent with what we're doing. I think it is consistent with what's in the Delta Plan right now. But, of course, Cindy and Joe may address this later, and we've been living through this. The Delta Plan itself, the adoption process, has its own procedures and processes that we have to go through. So I think they're compatible and consistent.
Don.
I think Joe may want to respond.
Well, and I just wanted to point out that there are other efforts to do this. We're going to hear later on from Jonas and potentially Jason talking about the near-term projects that the process they're going through, which I think is complementary to what we're wanting to do, and other places, DWR, Department of Fish and Game. We can't just stop work while we're working on the plan, and so our goal is to say, yes, we're going to move ahead, and the council's going to make recommendations for funding, and hopefully people will pay attention.
Randy. Oh, I'm sorry. Don then Randy.
First.
Excuse me. I
Just,
apologize.
that's right. Just to the guiding principles, Cindy, your number 4 about the no regrets, and it also talks about which are compatible with preferred BDCP alternative. There are, as you're well aware, 15 different alternatives in BDCP. And so the marker here is going to be the preferred project as being what everything has to bounce off of in order to meet the principles as outlined, and maybe expand on, rather than conjecture, expand upon what's anticipated there as to how that would be applied.
That's a good question. Can I punt back to you, Joe?
Yes, I'll be glad to
Thanks.
answer that one.
Thank you.
If someone wants to propose building an ecosystem restoration project at the place where the intake pumps on the preferred alternative are at, that would be something that would not be a no regrets action, and something that we would say, no, we shouldn't recommend doing that, because it's clear that there are plans, although they're not complete yet, that might conflict with that, and it might end up being a waste of time and money to do that. So that's that kind of thing that we want to prevent. We want to prevent taking actions that we have to undo, or that will prevent us from actually implementing things that we will want to do in the future. So the preferred project for BDCP is the most obvious, but certainly not the only thing that we have to worry about. There are a number of ongoing efforts that we'd want to make sure our interim actions that we support are not in conflict with other efforts that are underway.
Okay, that's I guess a good example. So what about on the other side of the ledger, though, where you haven't identified specific acreages target, but there's going to be mitigation requirements as outlined, totaling up to 113,000 acres over time, adaptively managed. I understand all that as background, but so if somebody wanted to come in and do something that wasn't necessarily habitat restoration, but wanted to do a project of some sort that would be of a nature that might be compatible with other strategies in the Delta, but likewise, that would be seen if that was a critical area for habitat restoration, they wanted to do something that was a project nature, you know, some sort of farming activity that might require doing things on the ground, though, that would also be incompatible with guiding principles. I say farming. I don't have a specific example. I'm just trying to understand. So you got these areas that are identified, broad brush, for mitigation strategies over time, and if they came in under a near-term action, those two would be precluded.
Yes, if somebody came in and said, I don't know, farming's not something
Right,
that fits in there, so let's pick Caltrans. Caltrans wants to build a new 8-lane freeway in a place that would certainly help the Delta economy, but in a place that is inconsistent with either our Delta plan where we laid out those
Or
things.
maybe like 50-year flood protection only,
Yeah.
which is their current level of protection on state highways.
Yeah, so if they did that, then that kind of a project might be inconsistent with these principles. So I don't think it impacts farm operations, that kind of thing, but it does impact what the council, if we use these principles, we're not talking about stopping projects, again, because we don't have that authority, but we're talking about what are the projects the council would support moving ahead with on an interim basis. And I don't think the council would want to support a project moving ahead that is likely to have significant impacts that hinder implementation of the co-equal goals. I guess maybe putting it in that framework of the co-equal goals is how I would do it.
Randy, then Hank.
This is a comment probably more directed to Carl, but it's in response, Cindy, to your report and the written material you provided us. The finance aspect of near-term actions, I think, is a little bit weak in terms of what I've heard and what I see. Okay. It's treated as if it's a bullet point in a particular project or organizational approach, as opposed to this overarching need for the beginning of a plan in support of an ultimate Delta plan. So, Carl, as you go through this, if there's something in here that staff has talked about that goes to things such as taking an inventory of current funding that's in place and projects that are already underway to help us better understand where money is currently being spent as it relates to what we think ought to be done into the future, I'd really like to hear that. And if I don't, I'm going to ask that you consider adding that to your mix.
Thank you.
Hank?
Yeah, in terms of the guiding principles, I think, probably the first and foremost, and maybe it's understood, I think it should be made explicit, is that nothing should be done that's at variance with the plan as it now stands.
Good.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Ms. Messer, how do you want to walk through this?
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Carl.
Okay, Carl?
He'll take us through the rest of this.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to walk through and describe briefly the various categories of near-term actions that we're considering here. As you will notice, they follow the outline of the Delta Plan, and they follow the chapters of the Delta Plan, chapters 2 through 8. The first category is Chapter 2, Governance, and basically what we're trying to do here is implement the parts of the Delta Plan that can be implemented. Peter described the science plan. We are proceeding with that, and that's very important. Concomitant with that is performance measures. We need to have a way of determining whether or not what we're doing is doing any good and how it can be improved. We are also going to start convening and meeting with an interagency implementation committee to make sure that the things that we're doing are compatible with the actions of other agencies. Chapter 3 is our next category, improving the reliability of the state water supply. There are things that can be done in the near term. I believe most of you are aware of the fact that the State Water Project has some severe difficulties along the lines of reliability that are caused by aging infrastructure, equipment maintenance problems, and many of them tie back to personnel matters. We are encouraging DWR to deal with these things in a prompt way. Regional water supplies is another thing that is ongoing right now, as many of the public commenters have attested. We want to see these things continue: desalination, recycled water. Another part of regional water supply management is the whole issue of groundwater management. There are basins in California, Central Valley, especially the Tulare Basin, that are terribly overdrafted and that will not function as a water supply if continued to be used in this manner. And groundwater management needs to be moved on. The next category is dealing with critical delta ecosystem needs. As you know, we have identified 6 priority habitat restoration areas. We want to see progress made on habitat restoration projects in these areas that are coordinated, that provide wildlife corridors, and that actually deal with the problem in hand. In that regard, we have the biological opinion restoration requirements: 8,000 acres of inter and subtidal habitat in Sassoon Marsh and the Delta, and 17 to 20,000 acres of floodplain habitat in the Delta, and especially in the Yolo Bypass. These things need to proceed. Chapter 5 deals with the Delta as a place. There are some things that can be done and that should be done in the near term. As you are aware, a recent poll suggested that 70% of Californians don't know where the Delta is or what it does. That needs to be reversed. That needs to be changed. We need to protect the lands in the Delta. We need to maintain agricultural values in the economy in the Delta, promote recreation and tourism, and just generally sustain the Delta economy. The next category is improving the Delta water quality. This is necessary for both ecosystem health and enhancing drinking water, because 25 million people or so get all or part of their water from the Delta. We need to support projects that manage flood risk in the Delta, and there are some things that are specifically mentioned in the Delta plan that we believe need to be moved on in the near future. A better emergency response coordination needs to be carried out in the Delta. We would like to see a levee assessment district so that the people who benefit from flood protection in the Delta would pay for that protection. We need to move forward with prioritizing state investments in Delta levees, and we have a BCP that we're working on that would deal with that, but we can't talk about that, right, Joe? Right. And we need to make interim improvements in critical levees in the Delta using subventions and special projects funds. There's quite a bit of money in Proposition 1E that needs to be spent on things like this, and will be spent on things like this over the next few years. And finally, we have the finance plan. I don't feel particularly competent to talk about that, but fortunately we have Kurt Miller here, who can discuss the finance plan. With regard to sources of money, you will note in your package that we have two attachments that deal with money that is available for for projects in the Delta. I want to hasten to point out that not all of this will be spent on projects in the Delta, but it gives an idea of the scope of the monies that are available. Attachment 2 is state monies. Attachment 3 is federal money being spent in the Delta. With respect to Attachment 3, I would like to call your attention to the footnote there that these are overall budgeted amounts spent by federal agencies, not necessarily monies that are available by way of grants and loans. Our data system does not allow us to make that distinction at this point in time. We will be following up on that to make that determination over the next few weeks. Attachment 1 is a straw man proposal, if you will. It is a group or collection of actions that we believe can and should be done in the near term. We have them distinguished between internal actions that we can and should be carrying out right now, and external actions, the actions that we would like to encourage other agencies, particularly state agencies, to do. You could regard some of these things as framework, as a general rubric of actions that other people could insert their specific actions. For example, Delta habitat restoration projects. And that's about all I have to say. I'll turn it over to Cindy to wrap up.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, before.
Yeah, Ms. Gray.
I actually thought you were going to, I know you kind of summarized the different sections, but I had some comments on each section. So can we do this, or do you want Cindy?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. Can we go back to section 2?
Which
Number
section,
1.
Gloria?
Section 2, proposed near-term actions.
Uh-huh.
And the first paragraph where it talks about convening an interagency implementation committee, which means agencies within the system. And maybe this is a question of Joe. I think there may have been some discussion from the different stakeholders as to how they would enter into that process.
Yes, there has been, and we actually talked about it as part of the Delta plan. The legislation says we should establish a committee of implementing agencies, but gives no further direction on that. And part of your direction in the Delta plan is that we should construe that broadly and include local agencies, other agencies other than just state agencies. So it would include state, federal, and local agencies. So one of the challenges for us is figuring out how to do that, because as you know, there are literally hundreds of agencies that would be interested, and so how do we pull that group together? That is something that we have to do, and we ought to go ahead and start now, even though the plan hasn't been adopted, to get the group working and get the agencies figuring out how do we make an implementation committee that actually works. One of the things that we've learned is, in spite of the best efforts, there's lots of opportunities for better coordination amongst all of the agencies, and that should be one of the tasks of this implementation committee.
So will that language be reflected in the guiding principle in this? How will you include that?
So what I'd probably do is expand what we say about this in the chart there where it talks about the implementation committee.
Now, I looked at chapter 3, the next page, where you talk about implementation process and schedule, where you do include stakeholders in terms of determining priority actions. Is that the same thing, or that's separate?
I'm not sure. I'll
I
have
see.
to look at
That's on
3.
Page 3, number Roman numeral 3, and then it's number 1. Proposed implementation process and schedule. No, it's on the document, the guiding principle document.
Can I jump in just really quickly?
Since you and Carl developed this, you
Yeah.
better jump in. Sorry.
Okay, well, I owe you one. So.
Thank you.
Well, I guess maybe the short answer is there will be some overlap. There actually, right now, we're envisioning them to be slightly two different processes. The process of developing, taking this straw man proposal, this Excel table, to something more fully developed and finalized. We're also, just for your information, we would be reporting on this probably in the next few meetings, but staff in the Delta Plan Division, we've started to look at scheduling interagency meetings, and we've had them in the past where we've had local meetings with local agencies, the state and the federal, and we kind of kept them separate because it keeps them manageable. But we're in the process of setting those meetings up, coming up with the agenda, figuring out who to invite, with the ultimate goal being we'll get the right, probably staff level people at these next meetings to talk about the implementation committee, to talk about the agenda, the first agenda for that, what should be on there that will engage their directors, their high-level management folks, just the world of topics that we need to discuss, but really just sort of that kickoff, what brings everybody to the table and keeps them there. But I suspect that part of that discussion will roll over into the near-term actions and these different efforts to.
Cindy, what is the difference between the stakeholders with the being a part of the process for determining the priority for the near-term projects versus being a part of the interagency implementation group? Define stakeholders. Is it agencies? Is it organizations or?
I think with developing the near-term actions list, and again, this is my vision, I don't know that it's shared by everyone, but I think the stakeholders in that process, it does differ a little bit because it will include, for example, the Coalition to Support Delta Projects. That's kind of an organization that's formed around projects, around looking at near-term projects. So they would be included in the stakeholder groups for this near-term actions list development. They would be more, in terms of the implementation committee, they're coming from different agencies. They may or may not be the people that come to those meetings, but their agencies would be represented. So,
right, and again, I want to thank the staff for always trying to be sensitive to the issues from the stakeholders, and I know you've spent a lot of time, and thank the stakeholders for taking that interest also. So I just want to continue to see that process, whatever level it can be, as part of the implementation process. Thank you.
Okay. Randy, did you have anything? Okay. All right. Ms. Messer, where are you now?
I